Good morning. Thank you for inviting me here. I wanted to start by sharing a cute story I heard. It's about a man and woman who got married, and the next day after the wedding, the wife said, "The only thing I ask of you in this marriage is that you always make the coffee in the morning." So the husband said, "Okay." Every morning he made the coffee. And as the years passed, it got kind of tedious, and he said to his wife, "Well, don't you think maybe you should take a turn?" And she said no. So he kept making the coffee. One day he was at church, and the pastor said, "John, you look like you're a little down today." He said, "I am, but it's such a minor little thing, I really don't know if I should say anything about it." And he says, "If it bothers you, it bothers me. Let's talk about it." So he shared with the pastor, and the pastor said, "Well, when you go home, you say to your wife, if you can find in the Bible where it says that the husband should always make the coffee in the morning, then you go ahead and do it. But if she can't, then I think it's only right that you share." So he went home and he talked to his wife. She went in the bedroom and she got her Bible out and she brought it over to him. She opened it up and she goes, "Here." And John looked, and oh my gosh, there it was, Hebrews. When I was young, my parents lived in a village in upstate New York. It was a small village. It wasn't even the size of a town. I really loved going there. It was a totally different way of living than today. People knew their neighbors, and when they spoke with each other, they looked each other in the eye. Mutual respect was common. They smiled at each other and were genuinely concerned for their neighbors. As a child, I could go out to play, and I could walk over 3 blocks to a friend's house, and my grandparents didn't have to worry like they do today. There was a front porch attitude that caused everyone to watch over each other's families. We caught fireflies in a jar at night. On Monday mornings, everyone put their wash out on the line. There was an unspoken contest to see who got theirs out first. After everyone's wash was out, you could literally read the wash. You could look over the Johnsons' wash and you could see their grandchildren were visiting because there were children's clothes on the line. My grandmother had wondered if Mark, who lived 5 houses down, was still working his seasonal job in the canning plant. Sure enough, there was his work clothes on the line. The house next door was Priscilla's, and it must have been her turn the day before to have the pastor and his wife over for Sunday dinner, because her best tablecloth was there on the line. We went to church every Sunday, and church members were actual family. They supported each other, and the first time I saw that support was when I was very little. My grandparents told me, "We're going to the gas station, and we're going to the one that's owned by a man at church." You could count on things back then. Life was calm, soft, and gentle. Words spoken around women and children were the appropriate words. When I was in high school, I felt called to be a missionary. After graduation, I attended Montreat Anderson College in Montreat, North Carolina. That's near Asheville. It's a Presbyterian college nestled in the beautiful mountains. On a Friday morning, I was in gym class, and our teacher said we needed to stop and go to the chapel. We always went to the chapel on Wednesdays and Sundays, so this was different, and we wondered why. As we walked up the mountain to the chapel, we heard murmurs that the president had been assassinated. It was Friday, November 22nd, 1963. We solemnly walked into chapel and we sat down. Shock and disbelief, and no one spoke a word. We silently prayed. We sat there and wondered who was going to come in and speak to us. After 10 minutes, the side door of the chapel opened, and Reverend Billy Graham walked in and solemnly stood at the lectern. He and his wife lived up the mountain from the school. His wife taught Sunday school in the girls' dorm every Sunday. He spoke with us, and he shared that his last contact with President Kennedy had been at the National Prayer Breakfast in Washington, D.C. He shared that at the end of the prayer breakfast, President Kennedy and he walked together to the president's limousine. They were discussing religion, and when they got to the door of the limousine, the president turned to Reverend Graham and asked him to ride back to the White House and they could continue their conversation. Reverend Graham declined the invitation because he was feeling like maybe he was coming down with something and he didn't really want to be the one to make the president ill. And he said, after all, the president was young, he was vital, and Reverend Graham would see him again. But he wouldn't. Reverend Graham said that was one of the greatest regrets of his life, that he hadn't seized that moment. As we sat there, and when we went on with our lives, we could never imagine that violence would become commonplace as it is in our lives today. When a friend of mine, who is a certified addiction therapist, was visiting a rehab recently, he waited for his client in the lobby for 10 minutes. This particular rehab facility had an apartment attached to it where the owner and the family lived. The door was open, and the therapist could see the grandmother watching television. In the 10-minute frame time that he was watching her, she saw 3 murders. There was a time when grandmothers never saw a murder. Violence has become the elephant in the room. We all hear violence. We see it. We talk about it to our families and our friends and our church families about the violent world we live in. We hold our breath when we send our children and grandchildren to school. Shopping online and home delivery seems safer than going to the shopping center. What Reverend Graham taught us is that we are to stand on our faith and build it up. We are to seize the moment that's presented to us, because we all know that a person who truly has Jesus in his heart will not kill. He will choose life. Choosing life is found in Deuteronomy 30:15 through 20. As a church family, we must stand our faith and seize the moment as it's presented to us. For it's not the government or gun control will have the most impact on quieting violence. It's a matter of the heart. As we build up our faith within the community, our hearts must be filled with Jesus so that other people will choose life. Quoting author Knotts, I share these thoughts. Do not be dismayed by the brokenness of the world. All things break. All things can be mended, but not with time, as the saying says, but with intention. So we are supposed to seize the moment, intentionally planning God's love and God's kindness. Please join me in praising God for his creation, the planet, that he planted inside of us. His love, his compassion, the privilege of joining him through faith, to go with intent, using soft and gentle words presenting him as we lift others up around us to change hearts, to be the hearts who are truly full of God's love. Amen.